Our planet is nothing short of miraculous. Immensely intricate and beautiful ecosystems cover every inch of every piece we see. From the luscious jungles to the iron-rich deserts, and even those pieces we do not see, like in the darkest depths of the oceans. To date, 1.3 million species have been identified and described, but scientists estimate 8.7 million species live on our planet. When we try to comprehend all those species, many beautiful animals and plants come to the front of our minds. We may think of giraffes, coral reefs, tigers, elephants, or other flashy species. Some may think of the last time they visited a zoo and all the animals they saw there. Some may think of a camping trip or an encounter in the wilderness with wildlife. But when talking about the abundance of varieties of species, rarely do people think about the growing percentage of animals being threatened with extinction. And even less people think about or even realize that many of these endangered species are being poached, stolen, smuggled, beaten, skinned, tortured, and killed every day simply for consumer enjoyment. The international endangered species trade has taken countless victims, animal and human, throughout all its stages for its entire existence. Conservation organizations, government officials, and activists have fought this beastly market for years and continue to fight it every day. People do not realize just how deep, how expansive, and just how horrific the international endangered species trade is. We are aware of the ivory trade and the political responses around the world.
The message from Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta is very clear. His government will not rest in the fight against poaching and illegal trade in ivory.
We remember the stories big enough to make the news.
It was a jungle out there. Lions and tigers, monkeys and bears, wolves and baboons, all kinds of wild animals, dozens of them on the loose in normally quiet Zanesville, Ohio, once known as the pottery capital of the world and home to 25,000 people. One of those people had kept these animals on his farm, and last night, the police say, for reasons we may never know, he set the animals free and then took his own life. Then it got very dangerous very fast.
But often we fail to recognize the horrible situations right in front of us. Millions of cuddling industries, traveling circuses, photo industries, unlicensed zoos, and exotic animal collectors exist in the United States and will happily take your money and not tell you the truth. Today, we will explore stories of creatures big and small to get a mere glimpse into the international endangered species trade, starting with their countries of origin and their journeys to their homes today. But to understand the supply, we must first examine the demand. The black market, an ominous underground trade hub shrouded in mystery and ethical murk, imports and exports all the things one could ever need but never politely ask for. Counterfeit money, human organs, drugs, and endangered species, alive or dead, are among some of the most sought-after items in the lawless exchange. Globalization and the explosion of the internet have aided in transnational criminal networks' abilities to expand their reach while remaining hidden in the shadows. Animal parts have been used in traditional medicines and healing rituals for centuries. The World Health Organization estimates that more than 6 billion people around the world still rely on animal or plant-based medicines. Many natural and traditional medicines are made of plentiful and easily accessible items legally obtained. However, there are many cases in which the recipe calls for an endangered ingredient. In 2015, a group of scientists investigating the toxicology and legitimacy of traditional Chinese medicines discovered that 50% of samples taken contained DNA from an undeclared plant or animal species, including DNA from an endangered species of snow leopard and possibly tiger. Some traditional medicines call for powdered tiger bones to treat arthritis, Some call for freshwater turtle shell extracts to treat cancer. Pangolin scales are suggested to improve circulation and cure skin diseases. And rhinoceros horn is prescribed to cure disorders from erectile dysfunction to cerebral hemorrhage and even AIDS. Several countries have enacted bans on the importation of medicines that contain or involve endangered animals, such as the United Kingdom and the United States. However, in some regions of the world, these bans have only increased demands. And where there is a demand, there is a supply. Beyond traditional medicines, illegal ivory is another one of the most frequently trafficked animal artifacts. In 1989, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, otherwise known as CITES, and the 103 member nations at the time, agreed to ban the international trade of ivory in all of its forms. Following the meeting, Kenya burned 2,000 confiscated elephant tusks to send a message to the world that the ivory trade could push African elephants to extinction.
If the elephant is to be saved from extinction, poaching must be stopped.
The goal of this agreement was to restore elephant populations in African countries to healthy numbers. However, studies found that overall numbers increased, but elephant populations in several African countries continued to decrease. This decline can be explained by loopholes in legislation, corrupt governments, and unregulated domestic and international ivory markets. Sovereign countries are under no legal obligation to comply with the agreements made in CITES. Each country is allowed to rule and regulate the markets within their own borders. Because of this loophole, many unregulated markets serving international tourists have ivory souvenirs available in local shops. The problem arises when wholesale amounts of ivory are purchased from these unregulated vendors and then resold in other markets around the world. To get an understanding of how much ivory is being transported, officials look at how much ivory is being seized and how many elephants are still alive. In 2016, police at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi, Kenya, seized 18 pieces of raw ivory headed to Bangkok, a haul valued at $63,000 US. In April of 2018, 3.5 tons of ivory buried under plastic bottles in a shipping container headed to Cambodia was seized in Mozambique. Months later, officials discovered another shipping container from Mozambique that had safely arrived in Cambodia to be filled with 3.2 tons of ivory. These examples made the news because of the enormous weight of the shipments. Many smaller shipments of ivory reach their intended destination every day, continuing the supply chain. The most recent elephant population estimates, released by the U.S. State Department in 2016, believe around 400,000 African elephants exist in the wild today, signifying that 1 out of every 5 elephants has been killed for their ivory in the past 10 years. The black market does not discriminate against live animals either. If someone will buy it, someone else already has it for sale. The Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna is an agreement between governments that was first drafted in 1963 after a meeting of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. CITES is not international law, rather member countries voluntarily agree to the convention and are expected to implement their own legislation to reflect the goals and standards agreed upon. Member countries, or parties, must monitor the import, export, re-export, and introduction of select species within their borders. Parties are to select management authorities to handle licensing and scientific authorities to monitor the populations of the species and their impacts on the local ecosystem. Under CITES, the species are listed in appendices according to the degree of protection they need. Appendix 3. This appendix contains species that are protected in at least one country, which has asked other CITES parties for assistance in controlling the trade. As of 2016, 147 animal species, including several species of freshwater turtles and walruses, are listed under Appendix 3 and are currently under no threat of extinction. Appendix 2 includes species that are not necessarily threatened with extinction, but in which trade must be controlled in order to avoid utilization incompatible with their survival. Currently, 34,419 species are listed in Appendix 2, including lions, American alligators, and several species of corals. Appendix 1 includes animals with the highest risk of becoming extinct. CITES prohibits the international trade of these species unless the import is for scientific research. 931 species are listed under Appendix 1, among those being giant pandas, cheetahs, pangolins, tigers, and plowshare tortoises. The plowshare tortoise, or the Ongonoka, is one of the world's rarest tortoises. Less than 10 plowshare tortoises live in the United States legally, and 4 of those tortoises live at Zoo Knoxville in Tennessee.
We're the only AZA facility that has all 5 endemic turtles and tortoises from Madagascar here in the United States. So we have, we're really devoted to Madagascar here, and plowshares make up a big component of that. We're part of the assurance colony where we're raising up these youngsters to hopefully, in probably another 5-ish or so years, they'll be breeding size, and we'll try to breed them then. So with tortoises, you got to be patient.
Due to their endangered status and the resulting $20,000 price tags over these plowshare tortoises' heads, Zoo Knoxville must take extra security precautions to see that the tortoises are safe and secure. Security cameras are stationed in front of their outdoor enclosure, and every night the tortoises are moved to their indoor enclosure that is bolted to the ground, covered, and then locked.
So we have probably a young teenage juvenile plowshare tortoise. Unfortunately, one of the rarest animals in the world, and unfortunately she has a bit of her breakfast still on her face, so I apologize for that. Yeah, the plowshare tortoise historically has always been kind of a rare animal. Records show that they've been traded for probably millennia, and there's no evidence of subfossil records anywhere else outside of where they're found.
Endemic only to Balai Bay in northwestern Madagascar, the plowshare tortoise has been on the verge of extinction since 1950. Madagascar, located on the southeastern shore of Africa, has a subtropical climate and a population of over 25 million people. Agriculture and fishing account for roughly 80% of employment in Madagascar, the most popular exports being vanilla, coffee, sugarcane, and cocoa. As of 2017, the GDP per capita in Madagascar was $1,600, with 70% of the population below the poverty line. Tortoise collectors around the world are willing to shell out exorbitant amounts of money for one of these beautiful tortoises. Some reports claim, depending on their size and age, people are willing to pay anywhere from $5,000 US to $50,000 US for a plowshare tortoise of their own. With the current exchange rate from US dollars to Malagasy ariary, a $50,000 plowshare tortoise would equate to over 180 million Malagasy ariary.
The black market value of them just skyrocketed. They went from being, maybe a $1,000 tortoise to a $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 tortoise, and so they just disappeared within the last couple years. Right now, there's thought to be maybe less than 100 remaining outside in Madagascar.
Madagascar joined CITES in 1975. Yet tortoise populations have continued to plummet. The population of plowshare tortoises is so small, scientists and authorities are able to estimate how many are being held illegally in other countries.
The overwhelming majority of these animals are ending up in Southeast Asia, either in places like Hong Kong, Borneo, wherever there is wealth. Singapore is where these tortoises are ending up. So there are definitely many more outside of Madagascar than there are now inside. Worldwide, outside of Madagascar, what we know of, there are approximately probably about 45 to 50 plowshare tortoises in facilities that are either AZA, which is an association of zoos and aquariums that we belong to, or our European counterparts, which is called EAZA.
Between 2008 and 2011, A study was done monitoring internet markets and private communications that gave researchers a glimpse into the plowshare tortoise trade. The study revealed 218 plowshare tortoises for sale by private, unlicensed retailers around the world, with at least 80 living in Thailand. Some smugglers are able to sneak these tortoises out of Madagascar through the Mahajanga airport because there are no baggage scanners. Then they fly to Comoros Islands, then Reunion Island, finally landing in Bangkok, where sellers are not legally required to present proof of origin before sale.
Originally what the poachers were going after, the smaller ones, because they're easier to smuggle. A common trick that we've learned that they do is that you take a tortoise and you put it into a diaper. So one, the diaper absorbs the poo that we saw earlier. And it's also, if you have a bag and you say these are just dirty diapers, no one's gonna wanna stick their hand in there to determine what you're smuggling. So the smugglers are really smart. They've also, it's very common to see tortoises taped up except for just where their head is so that they can still breathe, but then they don't move, and you just have a shell, and it's very well protected. You can put 50 into a bag, and if you pay off the right people at the airport, you can get through both sides.
Political corruption, lack of capacity within law enforcement, and difficulties patrolling the tortoise habitats in Madagascar make the capture and exploitation of the plowshare tortoises easily accessible. Currently, if someone is caught smuggling plowshare tortoises, their case is examined by legal authorities and punishment results in a fine or minimal jail time. Local conservation organizations propose enacting Dina, the Malagasy traditional law, to protect the park and to fine poachers directly rather than waiting for the state's processing. Integrating Dina into existing codified law would give locals more power within their government and would improve environmental conservation practices across the country. Conservationists and scientists are attempting to foil poachers by attaching tracking devices to the tortoises or engraving on their shells. While the engraving or branding approach is controversial, it reduces or even eliminates the value of the tortoises on the pet markets and makes dealers and smugglers less likely to handle them. In 2013, there were 8 park rangers responsible for monitoring the entire Balai Bay National Park. This is certainly not enough rangers to prevent poachers from entering the park and stealing the plowshare tortoises. Another idea proposed by conservationists and the rangers themselves was to engage local communities in the protection of the tortoises by selecting para-rangers to patrol the plowshare's habitat. The para-ranger program has successfully caught and arrested 2 poachers. These 4 plowshare tortoises were confiscated along with 20 other plowshares from a single smuggler in Hong Kong, where they were then transferred to Kadori Farm and Botanical Gardens.
The facility in Hong Kong is known as Kadori Farms and Botanical Garden, a world-class facility, and because they're in Hong Kong, they receive confiscation after confiscation of all sorts of wildlife. Turtles and tortoises are the number 2 most threatened vertebrate class in the world, and that is primarily due to collection. Kadori contacted the Turtle Survival Alliance, a facility that we work closely with, said, hey, we have these tortoises, we can't send them back. Would you guys be willing to go through the process to import them into the United States and Europe? And so basically what we do then, Kadori has to apply for an export permit. We have to give it permission from Madagascar that the animals come here, and then we apply for, because these are on the Endangered Species Act, we have to apply for that permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service here, and then a CITES 1 import permit. So that takes, even on extreme cases like this where animals need to be moved quickly, it still takes a few months.
The plowshare tortoises at Zoo Knoxville are approximately 10 years old. In roughly 5 years, they will reach their biological age to reproduce. If reproduction is possible in this group, the process will be handled with care to the standards set by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, by CITES, and by the AZA. And hopefully, Zoo Knoxville will be able to bring more healthy plowshare tortoises into the world.
So what happens if this species goes extinct? Their youngsters, their eggs certainly play a role for food for something like the fossa, most likely. There's unfortunately also introduced pigs that are eating a lot of the youngsters. But turtles and tortoises in particular, are really good at, they eat fruits from trees, and then they poop out the seeds, and then they have that natural fertilizer right there. So they really help with germination rates on plants. They've noted in places where there were once giant tortoises that went extinct because of people, that some of the plants just don't grow anymore. And so they've had to bring other giant tortoise species in as duplicates to replicate that, and now the plants are flourishing again. I mean, the general answer is they went extinct it's just a sad plight on humans that we allowed this to happen. I mean, this is not an asteroid hitting, off the coast of Mexico. This is us directly causing this species decline by collecting it. So it would just be unfortunately another of many sad state of affairs of what people have done.
The tortoises at Zoo Knoxville were fortunately rescued when they were young, and the process of their reproduction will be handled cautiously and scientifically. The story of the Bengal tiger, Luna, and the torture she endured while being forced to breed is much more horrific. One of the most charismatic megafauna, or one of the most recognized endangered species, is the Bengal tiger. The Bengal tiger, native to the jungles and mangroves of India and Southeast Asia, are biologically unique for several reasons. One being their unmatched genetic adaptation to their mangrove environment, and also for the rare white tiger genetic mutation. These are the stories of two tigers, Aragon and Luna, who were both involved in the illegal wildlife trade and ended up here in the United States, where they have found their way to their forever home in Albion, Indiana.
So this is Luna. She is a Bengal tiger. She's one of the only tigers that we have here whose species we are sure of. That is because she is a white tiger byproduct, and at one point in her life she was producing white tiger cubs. So one of the falsehoods that you hear is that white tigers are an endangered species that need to be preserved. That's actually 100% false. The white tiger gene is actually a gene mutation. It's not a recessive allele. It's not like when you see a black leopard or jaguar in the wild where it's just a matter of melanin. It's a gene mutation, and the last white tiger was taken from the wild back in the 1950s. So every single other white tiger or white tiger byproduct since then is inbred of this one cat. You may notice as she comes by that she's a lighter yellow rather than that deep orange that you normally see tigers have. So that's because she does have some of that white tiger in her as well. So in order to breed the white tigers, not every single tiger of the litter is going to come out white every single time. So that's when you have the white tiger byproducts. So they're not that beautiful orange that wild tigers would be. They're also not that desired white that you're seeing there either. So they are a little bit off in color, some more than others. And all these guys normally have some sort of deformity. A lot of times you're seeing eyes too close together or cross-eyed, ears like too far on top of the head, even things like cleft palates, as well as demeanor kind of being a little bit off. And that again is just due to that inbreeding. So when they are breeding tigers and they are in popular demand, they are a really high source of income for these people breeding them, especially the white tigers. They're seen as unique and sort of an oddity. People are sort of fascinated with them. So they turn them into just little baby factories. So generally, tigers would be staying with mom for the first 1.5 to 2 years of their lives. In Luna's case, they were being taken away at about a day or two old to be hand-reared and then sold off at only a few weeks old. So mom knows, in this case Luna, that it is not time for her to start breeding again. So in order for her to be able to breed again, her previous owner would actually go in and beat her into submission and exhaust her to allow the male to copulate so that she would get pregnant and this man would have his money. So this would probably be maybe 5 to 6 times per year. Her previous owner's name was Dennis Hill. He was living in Flat Rock, Indiana, just a few hours from here. So he was housing several dozen tigers as well as a handful of other exotic cats just in his backyard. So they were living in little 10 by 12 chain link tiny cages. When she came to us, she had no fur all the way up to her elbows because she was living in her own filth, her own feces, her own urine, straw. It was urine scalded off. Her inside space was literally just a little plywood box that she could barely get into and could sit on top of.
Tigers are the largest feline terrestrial carnivores. And despite conservation efforts, they are still under the threat of extinction due to the expansion of the human population.
So tigers are what's known as an apex predator. So that means they are at the top of their food chain in their ecosystem. So no other animals prey upon tigers. So that means that their job is to keep all of their prey animals populations under control. So for example, around here there are a lot of deer, and sometimes there are overpopulations where they're overfeeding on crops or native plant species because we have run out all of the native apex predators in this immediate area. So because they are so vital to keeping all of those other populations in check, they're what's known as a keystone species.
Tigers evolved during the Cenozoic era approximately 2 million years ago and spread through China and Southeast Asia, eventually expanding into Russia, Japan, Korea, and the Indian subcontinent. Scientific evidence suggests that tigers are essentially an Asian species, as their fossils have not been found anywhere else in the world. Empirical evidence suggests that tiger populations plummeted in the mid-20th century due to British colonial hunting and population expansion. Currently, the number of tigers in the wild is less than 4,000 and dwindling due to human disturbance and fragmentation of sustainable breeding grounds. Bengal tigers are found in the mangrove swamps in Burma, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and India. The Sundarbans mangrove forest straddles the line separating India and Bangladesh. In 1997, UNESCO declared 25% of the Sundarbans a World Heritage Site due to its unmatched biodiversity. And shortly after, the Worldwide Fund for Nature and the Wildlife Conservation Society scientifically delineated the Sundarbans as priority tiger conservation lands. India, one of the world's heaviest populated countries, is currently home to approximately 1.3 billion people. As of 2017, the GDP per capita in India was $7,200, with 21.9% of people living below the poverty line. India has become a major exporter of information technology services, software development, and businesses, and agriculture accounts for slightly less than half of the workforce. Previously, scientists and conservationists attributed the decline in tiger populations to urbanization. However, the Wildlife Protection Society of India credits the decline to a more secretive line of work: poaching. The Wildlife Protection Society of India has one of the largest wildlife crime databases in the world. This database currently holds over 33,000 cases involving poachers, wildlife traders, and information on 27,000 wildlife criminals, their associates, smuggling routes, poaching methods, and other relevant information. This database has given conservationists and government officials a glimpse into the sophistication and intricacy of the wildlife trade in all of India. Tigers are poached for their skins, their bones, their blood, or kept alive to be purchased as pets or to breed.
So that was Aragon. He's 15 years old. He's our largest tiger at the moment. He is coming in around 450 pounds or so. Hi, Bubby. So we actually don't know the species of tiger that Aragon is because he came from a roadside breeding facility where they were breeding a lot of different subspecies of tigers together just for the profit of those babies. So that's very, very valuable. That's one of the red flags that you get with a lot of those little roadside attractions is they claim that their breeding is under the guise of conservation, but when you're actually breeding different subspecies of tiger together, those would never actually occur or survive in the wild. He came from a little roadside zoo called Serenity Springs out in Colorado. So they were doing some pay to play, what we call it, where they're breeding a lot of mostly tigers, but other wildcats as well, just for the experience of the public to come and have those cute little one-on-one interactions with the cubs. But what people don't realize is what is happening to those animals who live about 20 years or so in captivity, because they can only be played with up to those first 12 weeks of life. A lot of times those places end up shutting down because their only source of income is those pay to play, and then they've got all of these animals and they're not really sure what to do with them. So that's why a lot of times you see them in hoarding-esque situations where they're just overpopulated or living in tiny cages. A lot of times they're also being sold out the back door to the private pet trade. They also may be sold off to canned hunts. So a canned hunt is just how it sounds. So they'll either be put in a really small area or in a transport cage, and people can actually pay money to come and shoot them for their parts.
Today, there are more tigers in captivity than in the wild. Tigers in captivity can live 5 to 10 years longer than those in the wild and therefore require different care.
So there are actually an estimated 25,000 or so tigers just in captivity in the US alone. And across all the different subspecies in the wild, there's only an estimated about 3,000 left.
Most of the tigers recovered from unlicensed zoos and owners are put into a database and then rehomed by conservation groups into accredited sanctuaries or zoos.
So the main difference between accredited sanctuaries and accredited zoos is sanctuary animals are all rescued. So in an ideal world, sanctuaries actually would not exist because there wouldn't be a problem that they are here to solve. So sanctuaries exist to help put a stop to the exotic pet trade and the black market trade of parts, as well as giving the animals who are immediately affected permanent refuge.
Black Pine Animal Sanctuary, where Luna and Aragon live, is accredited by the Global Federation for Animal Sanctuaries, or GFAS for short. This organization has created the highest standards of care that a facility must adhere to in order to receive their accreditation.
Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, our mission is really to improve the lives of animals who require care by sanctuaries. And those could be sanctuaries that provide lifetime care for those animals. It might be rescue groups who provide temporary care. So those would be things like we would see with domesticated animals, maybe equines or farm animals, where the end goal is to get those animals adopted into a permanent private home. And it may also be like wildlife release and rehabilitation centers where wildlife are treated and then released into their native habitats where possible. So right now we have 183 accredited sanctuaries, and those are across the world. We have sanctuaries located in 16 different countries right now, and I believe that's spread out over 4 different continents. And each year it grows. We accredit anywhere from 20 to 50 additional sanctuaries a year.
Both the AZA and GFAS play equally important roles in wildlife conservation and education, even though zoos and sanctuaries are very different.
We have some basic eligibility requirements to be accredited by Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. Those include things like the organization has to be a nonprofit or a non-commercial entity. They have to agree to certain philosophical tenets, things like no breeding of the sanctuary animals, no invasive research is done on the sanctuary animals, no direct contact with the animals, wild animals, and members of the public. And then, of course, each animal taxa has its own set of standards, which really goes into details as far as housing and health care, veterinary care, as well as the organization's governance and finance. And we have 24 sets of those standards. Really covers everything except for domestic dogs and cats.
There are countless stories of animals caught up in the international endangered species trade. Over 90 of these animals live at Black Pine Animal Sanctuary alone. These animals were some of the luckier ones. Endangered species have been confiscated in airports, semi-trailers, and even FedEx packages. And the people involved in the trade are not going to stop unless harsher punishments are on the table. In Madagascar and India, animal smugglers receive minimal jail sentences and fines. In the United States, people involved in the trade are fined and the animals are taken from them, allowing these dealers and buyers to continue the cycle. While there is no international law regarding the sale of endangered species, countries should agree upon some sort of fair punishment that discourages people involved in this trade from poaching, selling, and buying endangered animals. Unless government officials, conservation groups, and scientists come together to enact real laws prohibiting this trade, we could see the extinction of many beautiful species in their natural environment in only a few short years.